It had been exactly 1 year since Elizabeth lost her husband, John. 365 days of waking up to silence, of reaching across the bed to find only cold sheets, of speaking into empty rooms and hearing nothing but the echo of her own voice. Every morning, like a ritual she couldn't break, Elizabeth prepared 2 cups of coffee. The habit had become automatic muscle memory from decades of marriage. She would place them on the kitchen table, just as she always had. 1 cup steamed gently, the bitter aroma filling the small kitchen. The other grew cold as the minutes passed, a daily monument to absence. She would sit there sometimes, watching the steam dissipate, watching the coffee in the second cup form a thin film on its surface. It was a strange comfort, this repetition. As if by maintaining the routine, she could somehow keep a piece of John alive in the morning light. Her son, Michael, had been calling less and less frequently. At first, in those raw months after the funeral, he had checked in daily. Then weekly. Now, sometimes 2 weeks would pass before she heard his voice. Elizabeth understood. Grief was exhausting, and Michael had his own life, his wife Sarah. His work, his own ways of processing the loss. Still, the silence between his calls felt heavy, like a weight pressing on her chest. She spent her days moving through the house like a ghost, touching objects that John had touched, sitting in chairs he had favored, reading books from his shelves. The house was full of him, yet completely empty of him. This paradox occupied her thoughts constantly. One afternoon, restless and searching for something she couldn't name, Elizabeth climbed the narrow stairs to the attic. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that sliced through the small window. Cardboard boxes, old furniture, forgotten belongings, the archaeology of a shared life. In the corner, beneath a stack of old tax documents, she found John's journal. The leather cover was worn soft. From years of handling, the pages yellowed at the edges. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The handwriting was unmistakably his, those careful, measured letters, slightly slanted to the right. She ran her fingers over the ink, as if she could feel the pressure of his hand through time itself. She read, "Today I thought of you again. You were never alone, my love. Even when I'm not there, I'm thinking of you. Always." Elizabeth closed her eyes, pressing the journal to her chest. For the first time in months, she felt something other than the hollow ache of loss. It was small, fragile, a warmth spreading gently through her ribcage, like sunlight breaking through clouds. That evening, she moved through her kitchen with deliberate care, preparing dinner for one. The knife against the cutting board made a rhythmic sound, tap, tap, tap. She whispered to herself, a prayer or a wish, let this day pass safely. Let tomorrow come gently. Before bed, she sent Michael a text message, "Are you doing well? I hope so." The response came late, just 3 words, "I'm okay, Mom." But in those 3 words, she heard concern, love. The complexity of a relationship strained by shared grief. Before sleep, Elizabeth took out an old photo album. There was John, frozen in time, his smile bright and whole. She traced the contours of his face with her fingertip, and longing filled her completely. Alone, yes, but in her longing, she felt alive. Connected still to what had been, to what she had loved so deeply. 3.5 minutes the next morning began like all the others. But it was interrupted by the sound of a car in the driveway. Elizabeth looked out the window to see Michael's sedan, and her heart lifted and sank. Simultaneously, joy at seeing him, anxiety about why he had come unannounced. Michael and Sarah stood on the porch, their faces wearing expressions of determined cheerfulness that Elizabeth had come to recognize. The look that said, "We're worried about you, but we're going to pretend everything is fine." "Mom," Michael said, embracing her in the doorway. "We thought you might like to get away for a few days. Just a short trip to the coast." Some fresh air, a change of scenery. Elizabeth felt a knot form in her stomach. Change felt dangerous. The house, for all its emptiness, was safe. Known. But she looked at Michael's hopeful face and Sarah's kind smile. And she heard herself saying, "That sounds lovely." As she packed her small suitcase, her hands moved automatically selecting clothes, folding them carefully while her mind spun with uncertainty. What if she couldn't sleep in a strange bed? What if being away from home made the grief worse instead of better? What if she broke down in front of them? In the car, Michael reached over and squeezed her hand. His palm was warm, solid. "Mom, it's going to be okay. I'm right here with you." "We both are." Elizabeth closed her eyes, focusing on the pressure of his fingers around hers. "This is real," she told herself. "This connection is real." As they drove toward the coast, she watched the landscape change outside her window. Suburban neighborhoods gave way to rural farmland, then to coastal scrub and twisted cypress trees. Small things captured her attention in a way they hadn't before: a red barn weathered to soft gray, a cluster of cows standing motionless in a field, clouds moving across the sky in slow procession. These things had always been there, of course. She had driven past them countless times. But today, they seemed to reach out to her, to invite her attention. Perhaps it was the grief that had stripped away the usual filters, making everything sharp and present and somehow meaningful. When they arrived at the beach, Elizabeth stepped out of the car and felt the cool ocean breeze on her face. The air tasted of salt. The sound of waves was immediate and encompassing, a white noise that seemed to calm something anxious in her chest. She walked slowly across the sand, her shoes filling with fine grains. Michael and Sarah hung back, giving her space, and she was grateful for their intuition. The waves rolled in with their ancient rhythm, forward and back, forward and back. Nothing had changed here. The ocean didn't know about John, didn't care about human grief. There was something comforting in that indifference. She stood at the water's edge, letting the foam swirl around her ankles, and whispered to herself, "I'm alone, but I'm not lonely. Not right now." That evening, from her room in the small coastal inn, Elizabeth watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and deep rose. The beauty of it felt almost painful, as if her heart had grown too tender, too open. She pressed her hand against the cool window glass. "I will be okay," she promised herself. Slowly, one day at a time, "I will be okay." Michael and Sarah suggested Elizabeth explore the small town on her own while they went on a hike. "Take your time," Michael said. "There's a nice café on Main Street. Enjoy yourself." Elizabeth walked the quiet streets, noticing the art galleries and antique shops, the flowers in window boxes, the friendly nods from strangers. She found the café Michael had mentioned, a cozy place with wooden tables and large windows overlooking the harbor. "A coffee, please," she told the young barista. "And perhaps something sweet." As she waited, she found herself whispering, "Let today be different. Let something new happen." She took her coffee to a small table by the window and sat down, watching the boats bob gently in their slips. She was about to take her first sip when a voice beside her said, "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" Elizabeth looked up to see a man about her age, with silver hair and kind eyes crinkled at the corners. He was holding a cup of tea and a book. "No, it's just me," she replied. "Would you mind if I joined you? All the other tables seem to be taken." He gestured around the now crowded café. Elizabeth hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Please, sit. I'm Arthur," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm visiting for a few days. Trying to finish this book I've been carrying around for months." He held up a worn paperback, a mystery novel. "Elizabeth," she replied, "I'm visiting too. With my son and his wife." The conversation began tentatively, as conversations between strangers do. Where are you from? What brings you here? Do you come to the coast often? But gradually, almost imperceptibly, it deepened. Arthur mentioned that he'd lost his wife 5 years ago. Elizabeth found herself talking about John. About the strange emptiness of the past year. It's like living in a house where all the furniture has been removed, she said. The space is the same, but it echoes differently. Arthur nodded slowly. Yes, exactly that. For a long time, I felt like I was just waiting. I didn't know for what. Just waiting. And now? Elizabeth asked. Now I'm trying to live again. Small steps. A trip to the coast. A conversation with a stranger in a café. He smiled. It's not much, but it's something. They talked for over an hour. Their coffees going cold and being replaced with fresh cups. Elizabeth actually laughed at one of Arthur's stories about his disastrous attempt to learn to paint. It was a small sound, rusty from disuse, but it felt good in her throat. When Arthur finally stood to leave, he paused. Would you like to meet tomorrow? Same time, same place? Elizabeth felt a flutter of something in her chest. Nervousness? Excitement? She couldn't quite name it. Yes, she said, I'd like that. As she walked back to the inn that afternoon, she felt different. Lighter somehow. The grief was still there, it would always be there, but it no longer seemed to fill all the available space. Being alone isn't everything, she whispered to herself. There's room for something else too. The coast gave way to farmland to suburbs, and with each mile, she felt herself retreating back into uncertainty. What was she doing? She'd exchanged phone numbers with Arthur. They'd had breakfast together that morning, and she'd found herself looking forward to it in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. Was it too soon? Would people judge her? Would she be betraying John's memory? Michael caught her eye in the rearview mirror. You seem different, Mom. Lighter somehow. I met someone, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. Just a friend. Someone else who understands. Sarah turned around in the passenger seat, her face open and warm. That's wonderful, Elizabeth. Really, is it? Elizabeth heard the doubt in her own voice. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if I should be feeling this way. Michael pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to face her fully. Mom, listen to me. You're allowed to feel whatever you feel. There's no timeline for grief. There's no rulebook. If meeting this person makes you feel a little less alone, that's not a betrayal. That's healing. Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. But I still love your father. I'll always love him. I know you will. We all will. And he would want you to be happy. You know he would. The tears spilled over, and Sarah reached back to squeeze her hand. They sat there on the side of the highway for several minutes, cars rushing past, until Elizabeth's breathing steadied. When they arrived home, Elizabeth walked through her house with new eyes. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, the photos, the furniture, John's jacket still hanging by the door, but somehow it felt less like a shrine and more like a home that could accommodate her future as well as her past. She opened the windows, letting the spring breeze flow through the rooms. The curtains billowed and danced, and she watched them move, feeling her own internal turbulence gradually settling. That night, lying in bed, she thought about Arthur. About his laugh, the way he listened with his whole attention, the understanding in his eyes when she'd spoken about loss. It was a fragile feeling, this tentative happiness. Like holding something precious that might shatter at any moment. She picked up her phone and read the last text Arthur had sent, "Thank you for the conversation. It meant more than you know." She typed back, "It meant something to me too. Let's talk soon." As she drifted toward sleep, she whispered into the darkness, "Maybe it's okay to open my heart again. Just a little. Just enough to let some light in." She spent those days thinking, journaling, talking to herself in empty rooms. She reread John's journal, finding passages where he'd written about wanting her to be happy, about hoping she would always seek joy and connection. "Don't let my absence make you absent too," one entry read. "Live fully. Love fully. That's the only way to honor what we had." She held those words close, like a permission slip from the past. When she finally dialed Arthur's number, her hand shook slightly. He answered on the second ring. "Elizabeth. I was hoping you'd call." They talked for an hour, then two. About books and music, about their children, about the small absurdities of daily life. The conversation was easy, punctuated by comfortable silences that didn't need to be filled. "Would you like to meet for coffee?" Arthur asked. "There's a place near you, I think. I could drive out this weekend." "Yes," Elizabeth said, surprising herself with how readily the word came. "I'd like that very much." Saturday arrived with clear skies and warm sunshine. Elizabeth changed clothes 3 times, fussing over her appearance in a way she hadn't in years. Finally, she settled on a simple blue dress and the pearl earrings John had given her for their 20th anniversary. Wearing them felt right, a bridge between past and present. Arthur was already at the café when she arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee. He stood when he saw her, his face lighting up with genuine pleasure. "You look lovely," he said. "Thank you. You're very kind." They settled into conversation as easily as they had before, but now there was something more, a warmth. An awareness of each other that went beyond simple friendship. Elizabeth found herself noticing the way Arthur's eyes crinkled when he smiled. The thoughtful pauses he took before responding, the gentle way he stirred his coffee. "I have to tell you something," Arthur said after a while, his expression turning more serious. "After my wife died, I spent years just existing, going through motions. My children worried about me, but I couldn't seem to find my way back to actually living. Meeting you, talking with you, it's reminded me that life can still hold surprises. Good ones." Elizabeth felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I feel the same way. I've been so afraid of dishonoring my husband's memory, afraid of what people might think, afraid of being hurt again. But talking with you feels safe, natural." Arthur reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "We don't have to rush anything. We don't have to define what this is. We can just be 2 people who understand each other, keeping each other company." "I'd like that," Elizabeth said, leaving her hand where it was, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers. As they left the café that afternoon, walking slowly down the tree-lined street, Elizabeth made a quiet promise to herself: "I won't hold onto the past so tightly that I can't embrace the present. I'll move forward, one small step at a time." Coffee dates became lunch dates. Lunch dates became long walks in the park. They shared stories from their lives, not just the sad parts, but the funny, mundane, beautiful parts too. One afternoon, sitting on a bench overlooking a pond where ducks glided peacefully, Arthur told Elizabeth about the years immediately following his wife's death. "I blamed myself," he said quietly. "She had symptoms for months, but we both kept putting off the doctor's visit. Too busy, too many other things to worry about. By the time we went, it was too late. Stage 4 cancer. She was gone within 6 months." Elizabeth listened without interrupting, recognizing the need to speak these painful truths. "For years, I carried that guilt like a stone. I stopped seeing friends. I barely spoke to my children. I built walls around myself, thinking that if I just stayed inside those walls, nothing could hurt me again. But you know what? The hurt was already inside with me. I was just trapping myself with it." "How did you find your way out?" Elizabeth asked softly. Arthur was quiet for a long moment. "My son, David, actually. He staged what I can only describe as an intervention. Showed up at my house one day with a suitcase and said, 'Dad, we're going on a trip.' Took me to the mountains. made me hike, made me talk, made me remember that I was still alive and that had to mean something. He sounds wonderful. He is. And stubborn. Thank God for that stubbornness. Arthur turned to look at Elizabeth. The point is, I understand what you're feeling. The guilt, the fear, the sense that moving forward means leaving someone behind. But it doesn't. They're still with us. They're just differently present. Elizabeth felt tears on her cheeks and didn't bother wiping them away. I found John's journal. He wrote that he wanted me to live fully, to not let his absence make me absent. But reading those words and actually living them, there's such a gap between the two. The gap gets smaller, Arthur said. Not quickly, and not in a straight line. But it does get smaller. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the ducks, feeling the spring sun on their faces. Elizabeth realized that this was the first time in over a year that she'd felt truly at peace. Not the absence of pain, but the ability to hold pain and joy simultaneously, to be sad and hopeful at the same time. Thank you, she said. For understanding. For being patient with me. For sharing your story. Thank you for letting me share it. For listening. For giving me a reason to keep trying. As they walked back to their cars later, Arthur said something that would stay with Elizabeth for a long time. We found each other through our wounds. Maybe that's the only way it could have happened. Our losses opened us up, made us able to see each other clearly. Elizabeth nodded, understanding completely. We speak the same language. The language of grief and survival. And hope, Arthur added. Don't forget hope. She glanced at the screen. It was Arthur, but the call was marked as coming from a different number. Excuse me, she said, stepping away from the table. Elizabeth? This is David, Arthur's son. I hope it's okay that I'm calling. Dad gave me your number. Of course, Elizabeth said, her heart suddenly racing. Is everything all right? Is Arthur okay? Oh yes, he's fine. Sorry, I didn't mean to worry you. I'm calling because I wanted to talk to you about my father. Elizabeth's stomach knotted. Here it comes, she thought. The protective son, telling her to back off, to leave his father alone. I know this might seem strange, David continued, but I wanted to thank you. Dad is different since he met you. He's laughing again. He's making plans. He talks about the future instead of just existing day to day. I haven't seen him like this in years. The relief Elizabeth felt was physical, like a muscle unclenching. Oh, I didn't know. Dad doesn't like to make a fuss. But Elizabeth, I need to ask you something directly, and I hope you won't be offended. Are you serious about him? Because if this is just a pleasant diversion for you, I need to know. I don't want to see him hurt again. Elizabeth understood the question beneath the question. David, I lost my husband a year ago. I understand what your father has been through because I've been through it too. I'm not looking for a pleasant diversion. I'm looking for connection, for understanding, for someone who knows what it's like to rebuild a life from broken pieces. I care about your father very much. There was a pause, then David's voice came back warmer, softer. That's what I needed to hear. Look, I know this is awkward, but I want you to know that you have my support. Both of you do. My mother would want Dad to be happy. She told him that, before she died. Don't you dare spend the rest of your life alone, she said. Those were almost her last words to him. Elizabeth's vision blurred with tears. Thank you for telling me that. It means more than you know. There's a family dinner next month. Would you come? I'd like to meet you properly. So would my wife and kids. I'd be honored, Elizabeth said. When she returned to the table, Michael looked at her curiously. Everything okay? More than okay, Elizabeth said, and she found herself telling them about David's call, about the support and welcome she'd received. Michael smiled, and Elizabeth saw relief in his eyes. I'm glad, Mom. Really glad. You deserve to be happy. That evening, Elizabeth called Arthur and told him about the conversation with David. "I hope he didn't overstep," Arthur said, sounding embarrassed. "He's protective. Sometimes too protective." "No, it was perfect. It made me realize something important." "What's that?" "I've been so worried about what everyone else thinks about whether I'm moving too fast. Whether I'm dishonoring John's memory, whether people will judge me. But the people who matter, you, your son, my son, they're all saying the same thing. They want us to be happy. They're giving us permission to live." "And are you?" Arthur asked gently. "Giving yourself permission?" Elizabeth thought for a moment, feeling the truth of her answer before she spoke it. Yes, I think I am." "Good," Arthur said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Because I'd very much like to keep doing this. Building something together. Slowly, carefully, but really building it." "So would I," Elizabeth whispered. "So would I." It was a Tuesday evening, ordinary and extraordinary all at once. Classical music played softly from the radio. The smell of roasting vegetables filled the air. She was humming when had she started humming again? There was a knock at the door, and she wiped her hands on her apron before opening it. Arthur stood there with a bouquet of wildflowers and that gentle smile that still made her heart lift. "For you," he said. "They're beautiful. Come in, come in. Dinner's almost ready." As they sat down to eat, Elizabeth looked around her. Kitchen, the same kitchen where she'd spent a year making 2 cups of coffee every morning, one of which always went cold. Now there were 2 place settings, 2 glasses of wine, 2 people sharing a meal and conversation. John's photo still sat on the mantel in the living room. Elizabeth had worried about that, about whether it would be strange or uncomfortable for Arthur. But he'd looked at it one day and said, he had kind eyes. "I would have liked him. And that was enough." "I got a text from Michael today," Elizabeth said as they ate. "He's invited us both to dinner next weekend. He wants to try out a new recipe he learned." "Us both," Arthur repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "Me too." They finished dinner and moved to the porch, sitting on the old wooden swing that creaked gently as they rocked. The evening air was cool and sweet with the scent of jasmine from the garden. "Can I tell you something?" Arthur said, his voice quiet in the gathering dusk. "Anything. I wake up in the morning now and I think about what the day might bring. Not with dread or emptiness, but with curiosity. With hope. You gave that back to me." Elizabeth leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave it back to me too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching fireflies begin their evening dance across the lawn. Elizabeth thought about the journey that had brought her here, the loss, the loneliness, the slow, painful healing. She thought about John and the love they'd shared, how it had shaped her, made her who she was. That love didn't disappear just because he had. It lived in her still, a foundation upon which she could build new experiences, new connections. "Do you ever feel guilty?" she asked Arthur. "About being happy again?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember what Sarah told me before she died. She said, love doesn't diminish by being shared. It multiplies." I didn't understand that then. I thought love was finite, that giving my heart to anyone else would mean taking something away from her. But that's not how it works. "No," Elizabeth agreed. "It's not." Arthur pulled out his phone and showed her a text that had come earlier that day. It was from David. "Dad, I drove past the park where you and Elizabeth had your first walk. Made me smile. Mom would be smiling too. Love you." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes, but they were gentle tears, not the wrenching sobs of grief. "That's beautiful. He's right, you know. Sarah would be happy for me. For us. Just as John would be happy for you." As the night deepened, Elizabeth sent a silent message to John, wherever he might be, "I still love you. I will always love you. But I'm learning to live again, and I hope you understand. I hope you're glad. Thank you for the years we had. Thank you for your words in that journal, giving me permission to keep going." Later, as Arthur was leaving, he paused on the doorstep and took both her hands in his. "Thank you for dinner. Thank you for your company. Thank you for taking a chance on a wounded old man in a café. Thank you for taking a chance on a wounded old woman," Elizabeth replied with a smile. After he left, Elizabeth walked through her house, turning off lights. But instead of going straight to bed, she found herself standing in front of John's photo once more. "I'm not alone anymore," she whispered to the image. "But I never really was I? You're still here, in all the ways that matter. And now there's someone else here too. Someone who understands. Someone who makes me laugh and think and hope. I think you'd like him. I think you'd be glad." The photo, of course, didn't respond. But in the quiet of the house, Elizabeth felt a sense of peace settle over her like a blanket. The grief hadn't disappeared, it would always be part of her, woven into the fabric of who she was. But it no longer defined her entirely. There was room now for other things. Joy, connection, love. She went to bed and, for the first time in over a year, she didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she lay in the darkness, thinking about tomorrow. About the lunch she and Arthur had planned, about the book she was reading, about the call she needed to make to Michael, about all the small, precious moments that made up a life. "I'm not alone," she whispered one more time, this time to herself. "And that's okay. It's more than okay. It's exactly as it should be." Outside, the wind moved through the trees. The moon rose higher. The world continued its ancient turning. And Elizabeth, widow, mother, friend, and now something more, Elizabeth slept peacefully, held gently by the past and hopeful for the future.